speaking of which, this is one of Phil Verone's heroes right here. Mr. Stephen Perkins is in the house from Jane's Addiction. How are you, Stephen?
Good afternoon, good evening. I feel wonderful. Midsummer, kind of, beginning of summer, but I've been partying for about 2 months anyway. So, yeah, I feel pretty good.
That's awesome, man. That is
You know,
awesome.
speaking of percussion, when I first started drumming, there's a picture of me on a bongo. I don't recall, maybe I was 8 or 9, but I do have the recollection of picking up sticks and having rudiments and having to go through them on a gray and white Remo practice pad. Never had a snare drum. It took years, really, before I got to hit drums. But I was playing pads and pillows. But a lot of the rhythms that I make today when I sit down on a kit, I try to think of African-based djembe, maybe Latin traced, kunga and timbale rhythms, and think about the fingers of Zakir Hussein with tabla, and think about how rhythms are circular, small or big, and overlapping, and try to implant that into a rock and roll setting. And the mountain song or Ain't No Right, these were Jane songs when I was 17, 18. I was listening to a guy named Babatunde Alatunji. And Babatunde is a North African drummer, and it's hand drums and shakers, and it's basically what you would imagine an African tribe sounding like. And I wanted to infuse that into the rock and roll, so to speak, energy we had with the Marshall amp and the Ampeg speakers of the bass, which to me were. Go ahead.
Like translated into drum set, which is killer. I mean, I don't think there's many people doing that. Yeah.
And then I thought about the way the beat would go with African music, and it's like rolling an egg down a hill and not a ball. And that odd shape, it gets to the bottom of the hill, but it's got a hump and it moves in that, and it repeats the same hump, but it's an unusual place. And so I always try to find that unusual hand rhythm and impregnate a drum set with it. And if you dissect the drum beat, it could have very little to do with the bass drum and a lot to do with the floor tom, maybe like the Ramones. The Ramones might go somewhere like that, I have a great love for the Watusi tribe, and believe it or not, Adam and the Ants, and Bow Wow Wow. A lot of those beats are Watusi tribe beats.
Like the Bo Diddley type of stuff, right?
It does have that.
Yeah.
I was going to say that, and then you see the infusion of what happens in New Orleans and how that kind of infested the world, and up into what happened in Detroit, and that infested the world, and what happened in Jamaica. It's this great infestation of rhythm, and it all based out of Africa. And I always try to think that way when I get to a rock and roll setting, and even if it doesn't really end up being there, I try to think that way. And I got lucky working with some great producers, and a producer would whisper in my ear in the headphones, not letting the other players know what he was telling me between cuts and takes. And he would say, "Great take, think Jamaica next take." And he wouldn't tell the other members. So I'd be playing something quite different in feel, and everyone's looking at me scratching their head, but I'm just following the producer's guide. And then he'd put it back up, think ska, where you're kind of leaning forward. You do the next take, with like a ska image. And so that really brought light to how I can approach just a performance in the same exact drum beat. Just have a little guidance from somebody whispering in my ear to do something.
Right.
Okay, interesting. Okay, think, or think what Van Halen, what would Alex, or what would Mitch, or what would Keith do? But do the same beat you're doing, but how would Keith Moon approach it? Make sure you don't miss out what we talked about, because it's a song. And so those little cues in my ear, without telling the other band members or the other session guys, are brilliant, because, I don't know, but he might have been telling those other guys something I didn't know.
Right there, he's like, think Sinatra or something.
That's exactly. I had my
I have no idea.
Exactly. I had no idea what everyone was crossing paths in different places.
Right.
But what a brilliant way to approach music and art, and and that's the kind of thing that, going back to a life change that you went through, those life changes can happen. So they're microscoped, and they're magical, and they're sad, and they're strong. And that can happen in a session, maybe when you get humbled, you can't pull it off, or you don't understand what they want. But something on the opposite end can happen too, where your eyes open and both those experiences are great and hard on the ego, but also great for your growth, and having cancer is such a, not only an understanding of what you're capable of, then taking that energy and putting it on a snare drum. It's like,
Exactly.
okay,
Yeah.
that's incredible, like, power. And
Yeah.
then we were saying before you got back from the last performance, and how you understand that the music itself, is not just a driving force. It keeps people it's a glue. It glues people together. And it's so strange. What a strange product, if you want to call it that you can't hold. You can listen to Satisfaction by the Stones, but you can't hold it. And you can jump up and down to it, and you can jump up and down with other people and dance and hold hands to it, but you can't hold the music. It's air, and so is the energy that it takes to move the air. To be an instrument player, to be a musician, to play an instrument.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah.
So, but that's what's going on in my head on this afternoon. A lot is in the air here in California. The families, everybody supports each other in this family. As far as the artists, if you need a little time to get away and make some noise, I have a drum room. So not only do I hang out here, but the family kind of comes in here when they need some time to bang away.
I'm telling you, it is a great way to let off some steam if you have steam, or if you're happy. Even it's a great
exactly.
a great emotional release. So earlier you were talking about that when you kind of first got into drums. Did you say you found yourself playing bongos and hand drums primarily?
Well, I saw pictures, but I don't recall that. I really don't. But now that I play the drum set regularly, I always go back to the hand drum rhythms. So maybe there's something that happened, some kind of magical imprint on my memory, why I wanted to play hand drums. But when I got my first bongos, Jane's Addiction was writing songs on the couch at the Wilton Hilton, the house I was speaking about. And we wrote many songs with our instruments and played quite loud. And so we started writing songs on the couch. And so I went and bought bongos, believe it or not, Sunset Guitar Center, a guy named Dave Weiderman, who's moved on to the next plane, but we miss him. But Dave sold me some bongos. I still have them. And it was great to kind of get these tiny, small circular rhythms with my fingers. And I'm not a trained bongo player. I don't know traditional Latin rhythms or traditional African rhythms, though I can imitate but not replicate them. But to me, it's about the feel and what your homegrown experience is. I grew up in LA, a lot of drum circles in Venice Beach, and a lot of talkative people. So that kind of went into my drumming. If you're from New York, you might think more linear on your style of rhythms. Being from LA, a lot of people are surfing, and there's a lot of beach, and it's like half day is party time before you get to work, because the weather and the beach. So that goes into the sound of Van Halen. That goes into the sound of Jane's Addiction. That goes into the sound of even the Doors, of like what you hear from LA. And then, the drumming itself to me was like not only a self-expression when I learned how to play the pad and I listened to different records, but when I got my first drum set after my 13-year-old achievement in the Jewish world, the bar mitzvah, I took all the money. Believe it or not, David Weiderman, who sold me my bongos 5 years later with Jane's, he sold me my first drum set called Valley Arts Music Store, which was burned down in Laurel Canyon and Ventura. It burned down, but he sold me a Ludwig, 1979 Ludwig. But at that point, I started learning. I think the very first moment I learned the beginning of Dance the Night Away. Cowbell with the left hand and the hi-hat on the right. And I learned it, and my friends came over and I showed them. And not only was I turned on by learning it, they were freaking out because it was something relevant in their life. It wasn't learning, which I loved, Sing, Sing, Sing by Benny Goodman and Gene Krupa, or kind of grasping into some of the great jazz drumming. They understood the power of Van Halen. I understand how to make a beat that sounded like it, my best imitation of Alex. And that turned me on to say, not only is drumming good for me, but it's good for people around me. And that was the driving force, not only to get better, but to show up and do it. And I, believe it or not, I still do it. Drum circles. I would carry maracas or some kind of weird, shaker thing. People would bring, their party favors, but I would like to bring some kind of like shaker egg or something. You know what I mean? I like to bring a
Well,
little
yeah.
rhythm, a little
Yeah.
rhythm to the party.
Even at parties I used to go to when I was in college at North Texas, we didn't have anything, and I was like, grab some pots and pans, and I played them with my hands, and you can get different sounds out of the edges and everything like you would like a cajon or a
Absolutely.
djembe or whatever, and like I
Yeah.
legit did that and ended up. Those guys were like, "Let's start a band just from playing some pots and pans." I mean, it's the thing about drumming is it's acoustic. It's like whatever you can grab and get your hands on, you can make rhythm. It's very cool.
Yeah, it was kind of a it was like a realization, but it was also a sad moment. But when I was young, I wanted to be a jazz drummer because they were so great and they all had a different personality on the drum set and they tuned it differently, all of them. Even if the drum set looked the same, Art Blakey did not sound like Elvin, and Elvin did not sound like, Max. And I just, they were so different. But I couldn't find anybody in LA at my age that played piano, saxophone, or upright bass. And so everyone plugged into the Ampeg or a Marshall or a Fender Twin. And so you had to keep up with the volume. So a young drummer in jazz learned about dynamics. He played quiet so the upright bass and the piano could be heard. And then he would bring the dynamics up hot to keep up with the trumpet or a saxophone. And, a rock drummer and a Motown drummer didn't have that. They didn't need that, and there was something beautiful about quiet moments in rock, and you can hear what Mitch Mitchell or Ringo or Charlie were doing, and you Ginger. But as the '80s showed up, the drum sound got massive. You didn't have a chance to be a quiet, sensitive musical drummer. You did hear what was happening in Yes, Genesis, some of the bands, Marillion, and some of the greatest, of course, Rush, ELP. But these are like the top musicians of all time. Us young musicians couldn't like play that way. So it was like we kind of bashed away to AC/DC and Crocus and tried to get it done.
Yes.
So and so it was like it was a sad day to realize no one I knew played instruments that I wanted to be surrounded by. Now I have the chance to meet people that play trumpet, saxophone, trombone, piano, etc., upright. And my chops can now understand the power of dynamic quiet to hot, using brushes and mallets and all those great wonderful things you can bring as a drummer to texture. And we always
Yeah.
did it, even in rock and roll we did it, and we always wanted to. But it's something great about pushing a band like Phil Rudd from AC/DC. There's a power that he has that you cannot see anywhere else in the world, and a million people have tried to be like him and just lay steady. But man, he doesn't even move. He doesn't move. And everybody has to move because they get bored. He doesn't. And you think about Bonham, and he is so funky. He's almost like James Brown's drummers, but surrounded by rock and roll riffs. But if you strip Led Zeppelin's music, you hear Bonham. It is funk to the bone. And a drummer hears and sees that, and that to me is the turn on, is kind of like stripping the music away and finding out where the drummer's getting off on. For Jane's and Porno and some of the bands, Infectious, some of the bands I've kind of been able to be myself in. I have this African, Jamaican, Latin based, and of course East Indian, which is, like I say, the tabla. The rhythms are so tiny and the circles are so quickly removable and repeatable. Not like Bonham with levy breaks. It's a big circle and it repeats very slowly. You think about tabla, it's tiny little circles and they're like bubbles popping, but they make sense. So it's
I,
great to have. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask. I mean, all of this stuff, all these different influences that you had, were you ever trained in any of those areas? Is it just something that you kind of felt and just a feeling, or was this
It
something that
was
you
an
actually
intern.
studied? Uh huh.
I mean, I did not take classes in anything except I
Yeah.
gobbled up anything I could possibly listen to. back before the web was like everything was available. You know, I'm 55 years old, so growing up in the late, 70s and 80s, found myself at record stores, bookstores, reading about these instruments and these people that played them. Um, and of course, there was manuals how to play tabla and manuals how to learn how to play these rhythms. But I wouldn't chew through them and keep them like they weren't dogma. That wasn't the Bible. I just got some information, but I wanted to be my own hybrid of everything I loved, which was, Neil Peart, Cygnus X1, Hemispheres drumming, right next to Clive Burr on Killers or Number of the Beast, but put Babatunji and Fela Kuti and
Right.
Zakir Hussein, put that all in
It's
there
like,
because it was
yeah, like
all
throw it in the
important.
blender. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
so cool.
exactly.
Well, I mean, you think about it, like, I mean, the sound of Jane's Addiction, I think, is so much from the drumming. I mean, it's just so
Thank you.
unique.
Thank
There
you.
just wasn't a lot of that happen. Well, there still isn't. It's even like your drumming is just so unique. We have a couple people commenting on how they just love what you did in the Mountain Song and different things like that, and just being able to take so many different styles and have it be rock like that is
Well,
just so cool and unique.
I had a bunch of moments in my life that kind of triggered a change, and that moment I spoke of playing the cowbell and learning, dance the night away and showing my friends was a moment where it ignited inspiration, and I got better from that because I had a new quest to make people jump up and down to my playing. The next time it happened was in marching band when I thought I was a great drummer. They put me on snare drum. There was 8 other guys on snare drum, 4 guys on tritoms, a bunch of people on kick drum, and they all had great chops and great musicality, and they were very lyrical and very musical drummers. I didn't have anything on those cats. Maybe I had a better record collection, but I wasn't a better drummer, So I
A better record collection.
that competitive spirit. I wanted to be
Right.
first chair. I wanted to lead the drum section. So that was another moment, and I did do that. I got better, and I became the leader of the drum section, and then it became something that was kind of pedestrian and civilian and dry, and it was overdone. So I quit the band, but it was really good for my work ethic, my chops, and it was that inspiration trigger again that made me a better player. I would have plateaued. Maybe I had a good record collection. I played around my friends. Now I'm in the marching band. I changed. And then after that, I met Jane's Addiction fellas, and me and Navarro were playing in metal band during high school. We had a band called Disaster. It was a infusion of thrash. We listened to like Venom, Slayer, Metallica had a record out or two. We listened to that, but we were more influenced by Rush and Iron Maiden, where the technical side was more recorded, like almost like Steely Dan. You can hear everything. You know what I mean? It wasn't thrash metal. It was like clear, crystal clear of what they were doing. So we love listening to that music because we can try to replicate what they did on the Maiden record at 15.
Like Prisoner. You start Prisoner, and you're like,
Yeah,
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 it's
you're
right there,
15.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Like, holy shit, we could do this.
right.
But when I met Eric and Perry for Jane's, me and Dave didn't have the record collection yet that those guys had, which was Joy Division, Susie and the Banshees, Echo and the Bunnymen, New Order, Bauhaus, Bad Brains, Iggy, yeah, Dead Kennedys. We heard of that, we tasted it, but those guys lived it, and they were 10 years older than us, basically 8 years older. So they started giving us different records to digest. And Eric had a bass line for Mountain Song, and I had a beat and a drum fill. And he's like, "Why don't you come up with a beat that can match this?" Do 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 do. And I go, "That's all you do?" And he goes, "Yeah, there's a B part, and then there's the A part, and I don't do anything but that." And to me, at that moment, I realized his bass playing is a poem. It's a haiku. It's 5 syllables. You don't move them around. You don't change them. You don't jam on them.
Hmm.
He wrote a song. If you like that poem, if you like that haiku, read it over and over, tattoo it on your arm, live by it. If you don't, then move on. But he had a bass line like Mountain Song. That's a beautiful poem. And he's like, can you, instead of just doing a cool rock beat, maybe that Phil Rudd would do, and then a big drum fill that Neil Peart would do, why don't you write a drum beat that can match that bass line, and then you can stay in that beat and don't do any fills. And so that was like kind of the birth of another moment in my life where I was like, okay, I got chops and I can play like a fast machine gun drum fill. And I got some pretty good drum beats, but maybe they're not creative. Now I listen to Susie and the Banshees. Now I listen to, Echo and the Bunnymen. Now I'm listening to, uh, Joy Division, and they're not flashy drum beats, but they're really smart and interesting musical. And, even U2 back then was so interesting, kind of mechanical. So I had this rebirth, like, yeah, all these chops and these incredible Clive Burr and Nico McBrain moments, that was them. They came from England, 10 years older than me. What am I going to do? Why I can't just keep replicating what I love. Eric, the bass player, is challenging me to write a drum beat that's really interesting to that bass line. And so I thought of that djembe idea. I didn't think kick snare hat. How do I implement that feel that you would do on a djembe at the beach with your buddies?
Right.
When you're
right.
You're not doing 4/4. You're not trying to lay down the one. You're kind of playing around it. And so there was like another moment, like learning that cowbell beat or being around 10 great drummers. There's Eric challenging me to grow up and write some beats. And then that never changed from that moment. Be intellectual about it. Don't lose the charm of like, we're just playing rock and roll. Don't take it too serious, because it can't be serious, man. We're fucking rock musicians. We got to grab the energy by the balls and like squeeze it. So, don't be afraid to be smart like Joy Division, but don't be afraid to be wild like The Who. And that's kind of where James was like sitting. And then Perry had these lyrics, so we could write. His poems weren't four times repeat. It was like 2 words and then 2 lines and then 1 word 3 times in a row. And then it was like, there it is. Right. That's the lyrics.
There it
like,
is. Yep.
Can you write a song around that? Okay. So there is no chorus. There is not, we can write. Then the songs became unusually phrased. They wouldn't be 3 of these, 4 of those, 6 of these. It would just happen to surround his lyric. So the big thing became really, in a sense, brand new, playing rock and roll, playing with energy, but trying to really be brand new. And LA kind of peaked. X hit the ceiling, the Minutemen and Firehose and some of the great LA bands, Dead Kennedys. They came from up north, but we had Fear, Black Flag, but they weren't going to get any bigger. And then everything with Motley and Poison and Rat, they already got signed and they were massive. So the scene and the Strip was kind of done. So there really was a great time where people on the Strip ended at midnight. We were playing the late night after hours parties. It started at 1 a.m. So it wouldn't be odd to see Jane's Addiction play a party and Tommy and Nikki were there, but so is, Flea and Anthony.
Cool
and then Jane's Addiction is the house band for that party. Because those guys already had 3 or 4 records out, both those bands. We were fresh as rain in 86. So there was a really great time for that hybrid. I was 18. I was open-minded. No one was going to, offend me if they said, great, can you try it this way? I was like, yeah, I can do it that way. I can do it this way. I can do it any way you want. Let's do it, I was like, happy to try to make something new. So we really were lucky in the sense that we had the right people and the right time that all needed and wanted change. And now, from that was Infectious Grooves. And it was such a different experience because we had 2 guitar players, a bass player that had 6 strings. Mike Muir was in 91, very aggressive and still, but Suicidal was, all he had was Suicidal. This Infectious was his first time without Suicidal. And it was like a real intense experience after Jane's broke up in 91. I was really sad, but those cats came out to Hawaii, the very last show. They said, we're doing the No More Tears tour with Ozzy. Infectious is going to play 35 shows in 55 days. He sang on the song called Therapy. We're going to do a video with him. And I had Jane's broke up like 3 hours earlier. And I was like, let's go. I already did the recording with Infectious like 6 months earlier. So the record was in the can, but the tour idea, they didn't know if they were going to use, what they were going to do. So I was in a new band. And what was great about that is the tour was so blessed. Randy Castillo was the drummer for Ozzy. I got to hang with Randy for 2 months.
Amazing dude. I saw
Zach
that tour
Wild,
in
yeah,
'86. Yeah,
yeah, Zach Young, yeah, and 90. There was a 90 91. Zach
got
Wild,
you.
Randy Castillo, and Mike Inez, who's the bass player for Alice in Chains. He was the bass player that wrote the song "No More Tears." No more tears. So that tour
Dooby
was
doom
right
doom
after
dooby doom doom
Jane's.
dooby doom.
Yeah, and I got to meet a lot of great new musicians, and it was a revival for my drum. Another moment in my drumming career, like that big moment. Like I can do something brand new. I'm in a hard rock metal band. To me, it was a really intense record that was ahead of the game. The Infectious Grooves record. It was a rap metal. Yeah, I really thought they captured some lightning in the bottle, and it was
Oh
a
heck
pleasure
yeah,
to be.
yeah,
It was a pleasure to
yeah.
be on that tour, man. It was fucking really fun. Now, when I split, we started Porno for Pyros. Me and Perry were talking. Perry came to a couple Infectious shows, and he was like, "This is insane, but when are you done?" But Brooks Wackerman joined the band after me, and he was 15. And everybody's like, "Have you heard about this new drummer in Infectious Grooves?" I was like, "I know about his older brother, Chad, of course, but I didn't know Brooks was such a such a fudging great player."
Yeah, yeah.
But
It's
so
crazy.
now in Porno for Pyros, we started, and me and Perry had a big talk how we're not going to find a Dave Navarro. We're not looking for another guy that can play solos every uh, verse solo, guitar solo. We had a lot of solos in Jane's because Dave is a wizard. So the songwriting was Pete DiStefano, but he wasn't like a guitar wizard. So that's why the drums got a little more talkative in Porno for Pyros, a little more used for the transitions and the sensitive to hard moments instead of bringing in extra guitar parts like Dave might have. We brought in timpani, and I brought my bongos and my chimes and my timbale. And I really had a colorful sounding drum set. It only had two toms, but a lot of drums. And they were mostly percussive drums that I hit with sticks. And it was really a lot of fun to make the drum set work. I had a timpani pedal made by Axis Pedal, and Axis made me a pedal that looks like a double pedal slave, but it controlled the timpani where I didn't have to put my leg all the way over to the pedal of the timpani. I can just kind of do it right next to the hat.
That's nice, man. That's really
It's an
cool.
unbelievable drum set. It was
Yeah.
so fun, and that drum. My one of my proudest moments as a drummer is really what happened on the first Porno for Pyros record, because I really had a chance to change, and another spot where I changed and I made it a point, and it was like, if you're going to take your cymbals off the drum set and play for a month, you're going to sound different. If you're going to put timbales instead of floor toms, and bongos instead of a second snare, you put a bongo there and you play for a month, something's going to happen. And so that's what I did to myself. I totally changed the drum kit and put all this African and Latin drum set, mountable drum percussion. We wrote music that way, and my drum parts became, and I didn't do any kick and snare and hat beats. I really was like, the song "We'll Make Great Pets." That was the one beat. I kind of stuck to one place, but most of the record is all over the place. But even the tones on that song are timbali, a snare drum that's like a 12-inch snare and a 20-inch kick with no pillow. So the drum sound was like very odd, and that was exciting for me to have a reason to grow, and not just be placed in a position where I was forced to, like marching band or Infectious Grooves, or when Eric placed the challenge in front of me. I made myself, okay, what can I do different with Porno for Powers that I haven't done yet? Let's change
Well,
the drums.
it's like a total like blank canvas for you, which is cool. I mean, to have the opportunity to just kind of do whatever it is that you want and be able to feed the rhythm of the song, and
Exactly.
what kind of an impact that has on the whole song, especially like you said, setting up this whole different kind of drum set and everything. That's going to make you think way differently, and how cool. It's just really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. And I forced myself to stay away from kick, snare, hat, use the bongo instead of the hi hat. And then obviously I'm not just going to go on a bongo, man. You do that on a hat. Now I got to think of a rhythm. So my right hand's doing a rhythmic piece that maybe if you did on the hi hat, you wouldn't even think of that. You just got your hi hat part. So I told the hi-hat out, put a bongo there, and I was like, if I just do a hi-hat pattern on the bongo, it's pretty damn annoying. What am I gonna do? You know?
Right.
Then I come up with a rhythm with my right hand. All of a sudden, wow, I'm really opening up some ideas here that I'm forcing myself. Now, in the second porno record, I even did something and didn't even, step more into the hybrid world where I put one of those drum pads up that it was an octipad. It had 8 things to hit. I put some drum pedals up, electric pedals. So now I had a hybrid kit of half drum set, half African drum set, and it was a 3.5 drum set and half electric. I mean, it was a lot of fun, and I was able to actually put snare sounds on my pedal. So right foot snare sound, and then so I would switch my right foot from the kick drum, 20-inch kick drum with a pillow, whatever, and then put my right foot to the pedal next to it, which is a snare drum sound that I had in the V drum, and then with my left hand on the real snare. Imagine.
I mean, the possibilities are endless, right? Yeah, exactly. It's crazy.
You do like a triplet before the one on your foot. People are like, how the heck did you pull that off? What is that? Why would you do that? And it's like, I don't know. The bass drum's abandoned. You left that in the air. It's gone. But you're working something else. And so that was like, go ahead.
I was going to tell you, I got a guy here who's watching. He's asking, how do you remember all these different configurations? Because you've listed so many. I mean, I guess they're tied to the different projects you've had, right? And the writing and the writing sessions too, right?
My wife was just telling me, and my sister, because it was Father's Day, we were all together. My memory's insane. It's like I can really remember some incredible details, and I think it's because I've had so much fun in life. The bad stuff you forget. You really don't want to remember. But man, recording and exploring and having my dream come true, and never thinking I'm not in the mood, because if you're not in the mood, man, why'd you dream it? And you physically, of course, and sometimes creatively, you might not be on your best. I'm not going to think of something new and ingenious today. Of course, I'll try, but get behind the kit, practice the paradiddles on the dang snare drum, do whatever it takes to like remember why you fell in love with what this real escape. It's a wonderful escape. You don't age while you play, and you make people happy when they're around it. And I really feel like those are why I remember it, and why my drumming. I think that a big record that changed everything. Like all of us, we had those favorite records. I mean, I played the Zeppelin over and over and over, and I played the Who, and of course the bands I mentioned, the ELP and Rush, the more precision type drumming. And I even, got deep into Zigaboo with the meters and the Sly, and the funk movement that kind of took a hold of me with Parliament and James Brown. Those drum beats will never change. You listen to them, they're so concrete, and when you try to play them, you'll never replicate them. But they're so good for your drumming when you get behind and put a record on like that. It's like that. What I mean by they never change is you put it on and still blow your mind. It's like, oh my god, so cool, simple, and and if you take everything out, James Brown said it. If you give everybody in his band a drum instead of a sax and a bass and a trumpet and a piano, it would still sound like James Brown. It's the rhythm, it's the pattern, it's the placement, it's the way you do it, it's the attitude. So it's wonderful. It's wonderful to explore music and think about what got me into it and why I played and how I play and what turns me on. Those are the memories that really keep me happy. Now I've got a 35-piece drum set next to me, but it's because I don't move this drum set from the home jam room, and I set it up during the pandemic to be as every color possible, from 6-inch to 30-inch size drum. But the romance that you have with your hand and the drumstick and bouncing something off, usually a drum head, but you have a drumstick, you can play anywhere. But that romance is so deep seated in my youth when I first got drumsticks and learned how to bounce a double stroke roll off a drum or the drum pad, the Remo drum pad. That understanding that like this is the same rudiments that Buddy Rich learned. These are the same rudiments that, you know, that Gene and Louis Belson. That's such a great romance. I think you can tap right in. You'll never be as good as Buddy. No one will. He's the king, top of the pyramid. You got Vinny. You know, you got Bozio. He's the master of creativity. You know, there's so many masters. You know, Elvin is the man who took it like to me. He made the instrument speak. You know, like never before. But they all studied the same rudiments that we had to learn, and it's just that there's a great romance. You're in the same league. You're not by any means as good or never will be, but you're trying to be part of that tree, that family tree of drummers. And what came out of the military world and those books of rudiments and stick control, and how we see what Chick Webb and Gene and Buddy, how they took those rudiments to the drum set, and what they were surrounded by was piano and horns, like I was speaking earlier, the dynamic experience. It's sexy. I get off on that. I want to be like all of us in the same breath as Buddy Rich, man. I want to do. You want to talk about Buddy Rich and John Bonham? I wish, you know, I want my name up there. I mean,
yeah,
it's a quest,
we're Steven.
you know?
Yeah, totally.
You know
totally.
what I'm saying? It's like a massive quest. And they studied the same books, you know, the same books. Yeah. They listen to the same shit we listen to. It's just beautiful, weird, small, and rock and roll so young. You know, the 50s wasn't that long ago. It's a very young art form. And to be part of that pool is so it's an honor, you know, and it's a joke too, because rock and roll has got to break the rules. You got to have some anarchy to it to make it real. So what I mean by a joke is you got to have fun with it. You can't take it too serious, you know. You know, classical musicians and people that are replicating Beethoven and Schubert and Handel, you know, they are replicating a brain that wrote a piece of music. We are trying to like mirror what's happening around us and today, but of course not our hat to Ginger Baker because he blew our mind, and not our hat to BB King because, you know, they changed everything. You know, the greats to us are not that long ago, but the greats to a violinist, you know, is Mozart, you know. So it's like interesting. It's interesting what we pull from, or what jazz musicians. And I was talking about English musicians just the other day, because you think about Beck and Clapton, Page, what was going on in the Yardbirds and the Animals. These guys all went to English, you know, Queen's English music was part of their education. They learned about classical music. They were classically trained. They had classical ears. That was part of their education. Not like in America, music's not part of the school system, especially classics. So these cats were all taught music, and then they get a hold of blues records that are coming out of Chicago or Memphis, and they take their smarts and then take their love of what we were given, and they made the British Invasion. That's why the harmonies with the Beatles and the interesting parts that Jeff Beck and Clapton were doing with the Yardbirds, and of course Jimmy Page, the master. These guys were classically trained guys, and then you think like we're just, you know, and then of course the punk rock thing happened. You know, to me it started with Iggy in 69, but basically what happened with the Ramones in 75, 76, the Talking Heads and Blondie, you know, bringing it over to England. The Ramones obviously sparked up what the Pistols and the Clash, and then it all changed. These cats were not musically trained. These cats didn't have the education in music. But Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Brian Eno, the guys in Roxy Music, these guys went to music school because that was part of their education in regular school. So I love tracing that and seeing the sophistication of Stevie Winwood. The system, you know, these guys were sophisticated musicians because they studied sophisticated music. They were influenced by what was coming out of America, but what they studied growing up. And you see Jimmy Page at 14 play like a classical piece on BBC, and he's all proper. Oh, I play guitar, you know. Yeah. I mean, you know, that's not what, you know, you would expect a musician really today to understand the depth of classical music like those guys did. So I love listening to, Rob. Of course, and think about Deep Purple, the guitar and the keyboard. These cats knew classical music. They did. I mean, listen to the Highway Star. It's like they're playing
Yeah.
some classical piece in the middle of it.
Gosh, yeah, that there's other tunes like that, Frankenstein,
Exactly,
stuff. It's
exactly.
like, yeah, where you're just like, how did that happen? They're like epics or something. It's
It's
crazy.
yeah,
Yeah, I want to
and
make
I
sure.
love. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I want to make sure I ask you this question before we get too far here. I know there's some people who are asking, like, what exactly are you working on right now?
So a lot of great stuff in my world, and it's pretty exciting because Porno for Pyros and Jane's Addiction has never coexisted at the same time. There was no reason for it to. But last year, Dave got sick, Navarro, and Jane's had to pull out of a show. So Porno put together a set out of the blue, and we reunited, and that forced the band to look at what possibly has never been finished. And so, believe it or not, we still had like 12 to 15 skeletons, not full songs, but bare bones, ideas, lyrics, titles, melodies. So Porno for Pyros is kind of sewing up some of the old stuff with the original bass player, Martine, original guitar player, Peter DiStefano, me and Perry. And we're looking at seriously, like, wouldn't it be great if we can at least try to get some of those songs back on track and finished? And there was a reason that, you know Dave is better now, and he's that's a whole nother conversation. But what happened when he wasn't there and Porno came to the I guess somehow they saved the day, Porno for Pyros, and you got to hand it to the promoter Danny Wimmer and Gary Spivak, the great rock and roll promoters. They were like, yeah, Jane's Addiction can't make it, bring Porno for Pyros, no problem. And it was no like breach of contract or no kind of, it wasn't even more than a 10-second conversation. Come on.
Nice. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was like, right. So that was good. So that kind of spawned 2 or 3 shows with Porno, and we wanted to get ready and play that. So we did it. And that's brewing, and that's been very exciting. And there's a wonderful studio in LA that Johnny Depp had a house and turned into a studio. I don't think there's a name for it. It's just an address, somewhere in the hills. But we've been recording up at that house, and it's a great vibe. It's not a studio where people come and go. You kind of implant yourself for a while and take your time. And the tones are great. So that's Porno. And then if we, 30 years ago, we released our first Porno record, 94. So we're looking at maybe doing some, or 93, excuse me. It was the end of 93. So we're looking at maybe it would be great to maybe if we can throw some parties and play some shows just to celebrate, nothing too serious. So that's kind of where Porno's at. And then Jane's Addiction, we just did the 30 shows with the Pumpkins in America, 10 shows on ourselves around the West Coast. And then we just did 15 more shows with the Pumpkins in Australia and about 10 more in South America with Lollapalooza. And we had, unfortunately, Navarro wasn't there, but we had Troy from the Queens of the Stone Age. He played on like 35 shows. Then we have Josh Klinghoffer, great guitar player, musician, all around, amazing drummer. He played like 25 shows with us. So now we've got Troy and Josh and Navarro all part of the Jane's Addiction guitar team. And we're thinking about, wouldn't it be great to write new music as a whole big team, and not keep anybody excluded, because it was so fun to work with everybody. So that's not a bad idea. Who knows how the scheduling and timing of all that would work. I know Queens is just releasing a record, and Troy is now going to be on tour for plenty of time with the band and going to probably tour the whole globe. But hopefully he knows, we all know that if he's in LA or if we're close to him, we should get some work done together in the studio. Josh Klinghoffer, when I met him, he was playing guitar, drums, and keyboards for PJ Harvey. And he was a kid. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And then I heard he was in the Chili Peppers. That was 11 years ago. He was in the band for 10 years on guitar. Now he's in Pearl Jam playing piano. Matt Cameron got COVID Josh Klinghoffer jumps on the drums. They do 3 shows with Josh on drums as Pearl Jam. And then he jumps into our band on guitar, and he knows every part of every player. He's a real 360 kind of instrument.
No doubt.
It's been really just to have both bands coexist, to have both bands want to make new music and even get on stage. The reality is it has to happen, but these are talk. It's talk. It's great.
Yeah, that's
and
amazing.
So that's real. That's
so
really
cool,
what's
man.
happening in my life. I've got a 13-year-old son, and summer's here, so we're gonna have good times. I've been with my wife since 90. We married in 99. We met in 94. So, that's a relationship that's, like anything, you have to nurture and love, and you also have to give some space, hold on loosely. What's 38 Special?
Yeah.
Hold on loosely. Yep. That's how I recommend that for long distance not long distance, long term relationships.
A good guide.
Yeah. Hold on loosely, and drumming to me is not only do I want to keep in shape because I like to live long for my son and look good, of course we all want to, and feel good, but the drums, I want to have stamina, endurance, and I don't ever want to be replaced by someone who's got more of that than I do. So the creative side and the chops with the wrist, that really won't go away if you love doing it. But keeping your body in shape, that's also what I keep myself doing. I want to be in shape so I can play a great show, not suffer the next day or that night, play another show immediately after. And so it's like anybody, what's good for you and not good for you. Everyone's got their own, vices of what they like to do that's not good for them. So I try to keep a handle on all that. I'm 55. I want to realize I've eaten enough of those things in my life. I can change because I've already had enough pasta. I've already had enough, beer. And so all those things that I used to, enjoy, maybe at the point where you never thought about, is that too much or is that too little? You never even thought. Now you just kind of look at life and say, cool, how do I put on the greatest show possible? What does it take? It takes some good food and some exercise. What does it take to get up early and get my kid to school and then run over to rehearsal and rock out for 3 hours and get back in traffic and pick them up at school and not be in a bad mood? It takes a certain way of looking at life. And so I know what it takes to get through life, and it's not perfect. I'm not in any way, doing the same thing daily, and it's not boring, but I know I've got tools now how to stay happy, healthy, and productive. Because like anybody, if you make it in the music world, you have a lot of time off, and a lot of your friends have regular jobs, so you're not hanging out all the time with your buddies. The band, when you're a kid, rehearsed all day, all night, but now you rehearse when you can and you get it done. So you have time by yourself or with, your partner. What do you do at that time? And it's important to do productive, healthy things, because before you know it, you didn't produce anything. You don't feel good because you didn't make the right choices. So those things have really come to the surface,
That's really solid advice too. I mean, just all the way around. I mean, especially since we talk about drumming and then also with breast cancer and just ways to keep yourself in good shape and take care of yourself, and the point of healthy eating and good exercise. And I'll tell you, drumming is definitely cardio. I just realized, Stephen, we're getting close to the end here, so we're gonna have to wrap it up. I want to make sure I'm not missing any other questions here. I know Max is in the house, and he said that he loves this conversation. He's part of our actual Drumathon committee, and he's like, I would love to have you at Drumathon some year, so we'll have to check that out with you at some point. And
I know you guys go hard on that.
We do. We totally do. It looks like everybody enjoyed the conversations about Bonham and Iron Maiden and all the other folks. So, man, Stephen, I'm so grateful that you were able to join us this evening and chat about what all's gone on through your career and what all's to come. Super excited to catch you out there somewhere. And definitely will stay in touch with you about Drumathon, and we'll try to get you out here one of these years, okay?
100%. I loved it. Had a great time. I can talk drum all night with you, but have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.
Take care. Thank you. God bless. Take care, man. Bye. All right, everybody. That was Stephen Perkins, man. Wow. Give it up. Jane's Addiction. Stephen Perkins.